Hi, I'm Laura.
Hi, I'm Deanne.
And I'm Philippe.
Welcome to our Lymond Book Club. We are reading The Disorderly Knights by Dorothy Dunnett. We are on part 2. We're finishing it out.
That's Queen's Play.
Oh, oops. Chapters 8, 9, and 10. Here we go. Okay, I had this open for a reason, which you're about to find out. Before we dive into the chapters, Dee, why don't you kick us off with your thing you couldn't even wait for us to start recording before asking?
What the hell about? I'm not sure I want to talk about it now until we get there, but I was quite surprised that it appears that Lymond and Una slept together again when in Queen's Play it seemed to say that they never would, so I was confused about that. But in general, I thought this was a great set of chapters, especially the lit fuse section, like so good. It just felt like a movie where you can see like the fire going down the fuse and the tension is rising. Yeah, I really liked it. And then the Grand Master is super horrible. Like he just keeps being more and more horrible. So yeah, this is a good section. I liked it.
Agreed. First of all, I just wanted to wish everybody watching a happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays if you celebrate those. That being said, the whole section where the Calabrians try and blow up the castle was very gripping, very cinematic, like you said. There have been other action sequences in the books that I've enjoyed, but like this one had me on the edge. And of course I knew it wasn't going to blow up with them in it because there's 3.5 more books, but that was fun. I have to mirror what you say about the Grandmaster, although I'm starting to wonder if he's not being influenced by certain people. And I'm inching ever closer to making a final decision on how I feel about Gabriel being good or evil. And it's heavily weighed on the evil side at the moment, so.
Yeah, same.
Mm-hmm.
Sketchy.
I mean, there's maybe like a 15% chance that everything he's been doing that we don't quite know about is for good, but I don't think so.
I don't think
so. Yeah, and I feel really terrible for Una, but I also know that we'll see more of her at some point. So
yeah, I think when it comes to Gabriel, that 15% chance that he's good, like maybe there's a chance that there's a whole like the means justifies the ends argument that he's having with himself, but it kind of takes me back to that quote, which I can't remember who said it. I want to say Octavia Butler, but I don't know if that's correct. Where someone said, "What if there is no ends? There's only means." Like, and what does that do to that argument? You know, and so I feel like if he's trying to do something to some sort of like noble end, I'm still super suspect of.
Before we start the main discussion, I actually had a question for you, Dee. You don't have to answer it now. Maybe we'll get to it as we go on. Okay. But has your feelings about Jerott Blythe changed at all through this segment?
No, other than the fact that like I feel sorry for him. Like I think I have pity for him because I think he's going through, like I have pity for everyone in that situation. Like they had this they're having a horrible time and I feel bad for them for having a horrible time. There was a couple of lines where Jerott was sort of like clinging to his animosity towards Lymond. Mm-hmm. Like, really? So, you know, I really haven't changed. I still think he's still obsessed with Gabriel in a really unhealthy way. And I think he's an adult who needs to grow up and not be obsessed like that. So, yeah.
Why you ask, Philippe?
Because I'm warming up to him. I mean, I liked him more than Dee did to begin with, but I don't know. He sort of endeared to me a little bit during this chapter and the trials that he sort of went through. I still think he has some awful beliefs, but I think a lot of that has to do with being super religious and having this religious fervor and sort of, you know, I mean, we've already talked about how the belief in God and whatever God you believe in and being super holy can lead to doing some awful things. So
Yeah. I think part of my issue with him is that as someone who does identify as a person of faith and who does believe in God and does believe a lot of that stuff that he believes, I have very little patience for people who are like obsessed and fanatical about it. It's like, you can believe those things and still be a decent person who respects everyone and respects other religions and thinks people like deserve to have their own belief systems. And so, yeah, I think I have less patience
sure.
for religious fanaticism than perhaps maybe even someone who's not religious would. I don't know.
I feel like a lot of fanaticism is almost a byproduct of almost being brainwashed by like a person in power, though. So like I can't completely blame him for that.
That's a good point. If we think Gabriel is, if we want to say Gabriel's like really horrible, like manipulative to the nth degree, then maybe Jerott's position and belief system can be somewhat attributed to Gabriel. So that's true.
Well, the Knights themselves have this whole, you know, we kill clerks thing. So it's not just Gabriel, it's that whole system.
Well, yeah, it's all the Knights Hospitaller. And certainly there's no love lost for Diomedes from Jerott, but he at least owes him respect for being a leader of their religious sect. So anyway.
So before we dive in, I just want to share my overall reactions, which is this is like my favorite sequence probably because it's like action after action after action. And like you said, it's so cinematic. It's like a masterclass in how to write an action scene and like ratchet up the tension. And like you said, you know, they're not all going to die, but still you're like holding your breath like, oh my God, it's so close. And not only the scene in Tripoli where the whole place almost blows up, but also then the escape with Lymond and Una where they swim out there and you can like feel the warmth of the water and the moonlight and how exhausted he is. And it's just like, again, it's an amazing, amazing sequence.
Yeah.
So cinematic.
Yeah, it was really good. So if this is your favorite book and this is your favorite sequence in your favorite book, is this your favorite sequence in the entire series?
I don't know if this one's my favorite. I love the next book too. But I think this is my favorite, like, and actually probably my favorite scene is the Dell in Game of Kings with Richard and Lymond. But
the way early.
Yeah, but like I never get sick of reading this. It's always exciting and it's just so well written.
Yeah, it was very good. Okay, are we ready?
Yep.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's look at chapter 8. In chapter 8, just generally what happens is that Lymond is jailed and escapes with the young men. And then there's a plan to get the boys back into Tripoli. So Lymond has this plan, but then the whole, wait, we set this really slow fuse for the gunpowder happens. And then there's this whole adventure sequence to deal with the gunpowder. So that's sort of the overview of chapter 8. Okay. Where do you want to go?
I mean, we can just start going in order, I guess. I wrote down some notes about how it starts out where you feel like she really kind of viscerally creates a sense of exhaustion and anxiety of the people in Tripoli. And, you know, Jerott, so tired he knew it was a hazard to the defense and to himself, dropped beside the men and was wakened within an hour, sick and clogged with inadequate sleep. So you get this sense of like this ticking time bomb already because it could be a mutiny from within. It could be the attack room outside. They're all exhausted. And I just love how she creates that. Like, again, it's part of why the sequence is so effective because you feel what the situation is.
Yeah. And then when there's sort of this almost offhand comment, like, by the way, Lymond's in jail. Like, whoa, when did that happen? So I like that as it kind of gave that sense of Jerott's he's losing the thread of what's happening because of exhaustion and all of that. And so this whole major event happened that he was completely unaware of. And that seems really realistic.
Totally. There's also a great line where he thinks about Lymond, nerveless creature that the other man was, he was one of their most priceless assets at this moment with his hard expertise and his harder detachment. Queensplay was not that long ago, and yet think about how this is the opposite of Tatty Boy in every way. It's even the opposite of her vassal. It's this hard mercenary that he is now.
Yeah, and that Jerott's acknowledging the value of Lymond. He's a priceless asset.
It is really funny how Jerott, like, he can't stand Lymond, but he's also like, he starts thinking he sucks in every way. Oh, but he is a really competent mercenary.
Yeah.
Like in this situation we find ourselves in where we're being sieged, he's going to be like one of our best assets and we have to protect him. So I like that in this segment we see how quickly people fall for Lymond's charm. Like he's the Calabrians in their plan, like they know they have to release him because they think he's one of their allies just from the little amount of time he spent with them. Like also how quickly he sort of created this friendship with Salablanca, who is really cool. I like him a lot.
Yeah, no, totally. Also there's this like, I love, so basically Lymond intercedes and he prevents Salablanca from being killed in his brother's place. And Jerott is thinking about it and he thinks, since chivalry had obviously nothing to do with Lymond's action. But if you think about it, like,
wait a second.
If you think about why did Lymond do this? Okay, so there is a tactical reason because killing their own people is going to just destroy morale, faster and take their confident people away. But at the same time, it's Salablanca volunteered to take his brother's place under the whip. And we know how loyal and how much Lymond loves his own brother. So despite Jerott's thinking, there's no way that this was out of any caring about these people, like clearly knowing Lymond, he totally was like horrified by what was happening and had to step up to protect these people. Even if it was strategic, it was also out of personal care and morality and empathy.
Yeah.
And of course, Jerott just...
Of course it was the chivalrous act, like...
And Jerott just has no clue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it just goes to show that, which is another reason why I have issues with Jerott, is that he just doesn't think of these people as people. Like, it's not, if this had been a white European set of brothers, then it would have been a chivalrous act in his eyes. But because they aren't, then it's not. And so it's kind of like, So. One thing, this is I didn't make a ton of comments. I didn't make a ton of comments through this section, but one thing I did notice was a bit of Dunnett's writing style that I really liked. And you see it multiple times, but there was a couple of places where you see how she does, she splits her sentences with like the subject and the predicate and the end of the sentence sort of split apart by a whole bunch of description in the middle. And it's a really interesting way, I think, of creating tension and giving you sort of, she does it all through the book, but I just noticed it twice in this section, particularly where at the bottom of 200, the sentence says, Jerott did not know. So the actual core of the sentence is Jerott did not know that he was being followed. But the way she writes the sentence is Jerott did not know as he set off swiftly through the old castle, stopping at post after post, that he was being followed. And I love the way that she kind of creates momentum that way. And she does it again a couple of paragraphs later on 201, where the core of the sentence is, if he had any doubts, he dismissed them. But the sentence actually reads, if he had any doubts, padding through the uneven streets between the darkened houses with abandoned awnings above broached with stars, through their tatters and the rustle of rats and starving dogs and the thick blackness underfoot, he dismissed them. So like there's this lovely extensive description in between the bits of the sentence that tell the story, which anyway, I just love that.
She's a writer who loves using her commas and semicolons.
Yeah. The just the way that she throws clause after clause kind of in the middle of a sentence, and often it's description. Often it's clause after clause of description in the midst of the sentence. But
none of it's wasted. None of it's extreme.
No, not at all.
Irrelevant. It's all like part of giving you the feeling of being there and wretched.
Yeah, it's often setting the atmosphere and the mood. So like as we're drawn into the emotion of this place and the mood of this place, that's how she does it, which I just think is incredibly effective.
Definitely. Philippe, you said you like Salamanca. Why?
I just feel like he's. I don't know if I actually have a reason for it. It just, Lymond has this way of picking up followers as he moves around, and like this one act of like helping him out, standing up for him, and like he's got his service for the whole rest of this section. So, like I feel like Salablanca would, step in front of a bullet to save Lymond at this point. So.
Well, and Salamanca's super capable and competent, which you get in that fight with Jerott, which also just, it's nice to have more competent people around.
Yeah, and I was with Philippe. It's like he stuck around, and I liked him just because he seemed like a solid guy who was competent and genuinely assisting Lymond. Like, yeah.
Like he doesn't really know anything about Lymond. As far as he knows, Lymond is one of the Knights Hospitaller, and he's seen how awful that they've been treating the Moors and the slaves in captivity. So this one act of like standing up for the slaves is, he's probably never seen that from anyone in Tripoli before.
Maybe, but I wonder if he's more observant. Like I think it would be obvious, wouldn't it, that Lymond is not one of the knights, because the knights are all walking around with this big cross on their tabard. Like it's pretty. They don't really. I mean, they identify themselves physically with the knight, the group, in a way that Lymond doesn't. And Lymond has been running around Tripoli, like listening to people and finding out what's going on and talking to the Calabrians, and so I would think he would be actually recognizable as someone who is behaving in a different way.
Well, he'll know he's not a knight, but he's a European.
Yeah.
Still stands out, and he's good. He saves him. I love when Jerott comes. He fights with Salablanca. He's just about to get him, and then Lymond interrupts with a knife, and he says, "How brave and clever, Jerott, my heart. Now let him go." I just kind of super enjoy how he flirts with Jerott. The same way he flirts with Will.
Yeah.
And then they go into the whatever the place is with the chickens who are dead, and I feel like I know, it's so sad, baby chickens.
And she's back to animal cruelty again.
I know, right? Nothing good happens to animals.
Not nearly on the level of Queen's Play, though.
No.
But it's definitely like I think sets the atmosphere of before there was hope, and now there's like almost no hope for Tripoli at this point, and all the chickens are dead as a like representation of that. And then there's this moment where Jerott is thinking about how Lymond made friends with the Calabrians and is now about to basically betray them and undermine their escape plot. And he thinks that he himself wouldn't have had the stomach for it. And he's like holding it against Lymond that he has no qualms, supposedly. And it's just really funny because it to me, it highlights how Lymond is very unsentimental and how Jerott is so extremely sentimental. And they're just like, they're opposites in that manner. And it's part of why Jerott can't understand him.
Yeah, it's also super obvious that Jerott has no concept of the big picture. Like, he doesn't understand how actions can lead to larger consequences in the big picture. Whereas Lymond is thinking about the survival of these boys and the survival of Tripoli, and he is taking actions that would lead to a larger success for everyone. Yeah, and Jerott just can't conceive of that, which...
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, because if you look at what they're doing, what Lymond is doing is saying, let's save everybody. The Calabrians, the Moors, everybody lives. And what Jerott is saying is, we should just let the Calabrians die. That's more holy. It's like, what is wrong with you, Jerott?
It's so wrong. Yeah. And doesn't serve his larger goal anyway.
Right, exactly. It's only going to make Tripoli fall faster.
Yeah, I love Lymond's comment about all of this. He does this sort of run through of the situation, and he says, like, you get not only disaster, but a silly disaster. Like, you people not only are leading yourselves into disaster, but you're idiots in how you're doing it. And it's like you just see the disgust on his face.
100%. And then when Jerott talks about letting all the Calabrians die, Lymond says, that I am sure is what any man of the order would have done. I am not a monk. Just like he sees through their crap.
Yeah. And it's not like he was ever going to join them anyway, but I feel like this entire trip is just like affirmation of his, like, no.
That's why this whole ridiculous Gabriel thing of like, I want to give him the choice to join the Knights. It's like, dude, he's not going to join the Knights. He sees right through them.
Yeah. And if he didn't want to be, like, we've already gone through this whole bit about how he doesn't want to be someone's like toy or tool to be used at someone else's ethical idea. Like, there's no way he's going to be part of this whole system that is just using people and going through them like they're Kleenex, you know?
Yeah.
You wonder if that's what Gabriel's real goal is, because he has to see that there's no way that Lymond would join. So what is his motivation in doing all of these things to get Lymond to try?
What do you think it is?
I don't know.
Yeah, me either. I can't figure out where he's going.
No. But like, I don't think Gabriel is stupid, so he has to see it doesn't matter how hard I try. Lymond is never going to join the Knights Hospitaller.
Yeah, and obviously that's true. And if Gabriel is like masterminding something that we can't see, his sister has something to do with it back in Scotland, because there's no way, knowing from what we know about him, like there's no way that he sent his sister to Scotland for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it was just to get her safely away from Malta, there's more to it than that. So like, how does she fit into this plan? Which is definitely not to get Lymond into the Knights. So yeah.
I'm starting to wonder if Gabriel actually even cares about the Knights Hospitaller at all.
Yeah, me too.
So, but we'll get there. That's next chapter.
He does do all of this lip service about, like, he he's sort of, there's a point later in these chapters where it's like he's muttering under his breath and Jerott assumes he's praying, which I'm not convinced that that's what he was doing, but maybe he was. And there's, he's done some things about his faith that at least appeared to be genuine, but I'm not sure that that relates to utter devotion to the Knights either. Yep. Like, and certainly throughout history, people have had a faith that they were devoted to while also being absolutely horrible people who desired power above all else, and all of that. So I don't think those things are mutually exclusive.
Right. It's also possible that, going on the whole evil thing, if his original goal was to depose Diomedes and become the new leader of the Knights, mm-hmm. that once sort of Lymond was in his grasp and he heard all these arguments from Lymond, like, people won't follow you. Perhaps his goals have changed, and now he knows that that's sort of not really the path for him, and that there's maybe something else on the horizon.
Yeah, and I wonder if, like, it feels like, so the Knights are, one of the most famous military orders of Catholicism, but they do, and I'm sure, I don't think I have a very good sense of how powerful they were. I think part of that is my historical sense of their place in that world is a little, I'm not sure how specific, it's not very specific. So I'm wondering, like, my feeling is that if he's super ambitious, if Gabriel's someone who's very, very ambitious, is leading the Knights too small for his plan? Like, is there more to it than that? Because at least from my perception of this, it feels like leading the Knights, while the Grand Master of the Knights of St. John is perhaps an important person, it doesn't seem like his power is that extensive. So
it is very extensive. There's a line in there at some point about him being like the equivalent of a monarch, like almost. It's
Oh, really?
Okay. I forget where it is. I think it's
Hmm.
something like.
So it could be that leading the Knights could be Gabriel's ultimate goal. That would still be a big deal.
It's definitely a big deal to lead the Knights. Remember, there's a thing about Andon Montmorency, how his uncle or his grandpa had been the leader of the Knights, and that's how he ended up being powerful. Like, it's very, very
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Probably not his grandfather. Probably his uncle. Unless his grandfather broke those vows of chastity.
Right. Yeah, I forget. But yeah,
they're join the Knights after having children, which I guess is also a possibility.
I love how we're having a conversation about Gabriel in a chapter where he doesn't even show up. So.
Right.
He makes an impression.
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely probably not until we're finished with this series, but I'd definitely like to read like a nonfiction book about the history of the Knights at some point. I just don't want to yet because there's probably spoilers.
Yeah, there's all kinds of really interesting stuff out there about them. And like once you read the history, you realize like, wow, she took tons of what really happened and put it in here.
So is the Calabrians' plot to blow up the castle something that actually happened?
I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, that's a good question.
But definitely everything else they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably it wouldn't have to be, since it didn't actually blow up in the book. So maybe it.
But definitely their like mutiny is history.
Is part of it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were conscripted. Like, they don't want to be there, obviously.
Yeah, and they're like farm boys. Like, what the hell? I would revolt too.
Yeah.
Like, why? I mean, I understand why this happens, and obviously governments, I mean, heck, the US still drafts, like, we still have an active draft. I mean, I guess it's not active, but we still have a draft registration process, and you know, the British Navy was conscripting people forever. So obviously it still happens, but I mean, not that the British Navy still conscripted, that's not what I meant, but they did for a really long time. And so obviously pulling farm boys out of obscurity into military action there's a long history of that, but it just seems like it can't be that effective.
Of course it's not effective. It's because like clearly nobody really cares that much. Like the whole of Europe is just letting this happen, and they sent 200 farm boys and they're not helping at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, you know, not to be too political, but look at our government right now. You put corruption at the top and crazy stuff happens.
Yeah.
And you look back from, you know, the future and you're like, what the hell were they thinking?
Why didn't somebody stop this?
Yep.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to look back from the future and see like who gets blamed for all this disaster.
Or French ambassador in this case.
Yeah. Oh, here's a question. So obviously, because Dunnett is writing from history knows that the French ambassador did not do what the Grand Master is putting about that he did. So I found that interesting.
But there really was a claim.
Yeah.
Exactly like in the book. And so she obviously did her research, and based on her reading, debunked the claim and believed the counterclaims.
Okay. That's intriguing. Yeah. Okay, so back to this chapter.
Yes, back to this chapter.
So it's a silly disaster. And the whole point is they're going to blame like the Moor and his brother for this escape and try and get the Calabrians like back into Tripoli.
Yeah. And allow the Moors to escape to the Turkish camps.
Yeah, right. And like they're going to be gone and safe, so we'll blame them because they're out of harm's way. And then they go through some stuff, and then we find out that there's this fuse. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about anything.
Well, I just love how Lyman's reaction is to tell Jerott, do what I'm going to do, run like hell. And of course, Lymond doesn't run like hell. He goes to save everybody.
No. And like Jerrod's so mad at Lymond, and by the time he gets there, Lyman's already there and working towards fixing the problem.
Yeah, well, Jerrod's running in circles, getting lost in the town.
Yeah.
I had a question that maybe did get answered in the reading and I just didn't pick up on it. But is this Lymond getting caught up in the Calabrians plot? Because we do know that they didn't rescue him, that they went to the ammunition first and then they got the keys to rescue him. So is this him getting caught up in this plot? We know that he doesn't know about the main fuse. Or is this something that he had planned while he was talking to the Calabrians earlier, like in the chicken coop?
No, he wasn't planning it because it's a terrible idea and he's subverting it.
Okay.
Because he doesn't, because he knows that if the Spanish Knights find out about it, they'll like kill the Calabrians or whatever.
The main big fuse.
Either fuse.
Yeah.
The only fuse he sets up is he sets up the one to destroy the place with the chickens, right?
Yeah.
At that point, he didn't know that there was a fuse set for the main.
No. He finds, because they've got this kid, and the kid is like, you know, he's trying to escape, and he's like, "Don't take me back to the castle. Whatever you do, don't take me back to the castle." And
they're sort of like, "You're gonna be fine. Come back to the castle with us."
And Lyman's finally like, "Let's just knock him out and carry him back to the castle." And then he's like, "No, wait!" And then he tells him about the fuse, and so that's when Lyman's like, "Shit."
That's when they both freak out.
Yeah.
So this
Lyman's like, "Run away," but he doesn't run away.
This is all just Lymond on the spot reacting to getting rescued by the Calabrians and being like, "God, your plan is terrible. I need to fix this so you guys don't get in trouble for it."
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was figuring.
Yeah.
Here's my question about what Lymond says to Jerrod about do what I do and run away. I was wondering, so is he trying to, is that comment serious where he's like, do what I do and run away, meaning trying to get Jerrod to run away while he goes back and tries to fix the problem? Or is he goading Jerrod because he knows that Jerrod is so incredibly pissed off at him? And is he goading him to try and also fix the problem just in case Lymond isn't successful?
My personal guess is that he doesn't think they have a chance and he just wants Jerrod to live and leave.
To run.
Yeah. Because it's not like it's like a Hail Mary, like last ditch attempt to save them. He doesn't really expect to succeed. I think he just wants Jerrod to be safe.
Right. I thought that was my first read too. And then I wondered because I feel like Lymond's a good enough judge of character that he would know that Jerrod would not, because Jerrod is so impulsive and so sentimental, like you said, like he's just gonna be like, "No, honor says I must go back." So he's gonna like ineffectually run back in. And
I mean, I think he just has a last ditch hope of like maybe Jerrod will get out. But yeah, he probably knows that that's not what's gonna happen.
It's not gonna work, but he tries anyway to.
Yeah.
Okay. But then Jerrod gets lost in the town, like running around in circles, and
Handily that Lymond easily beats them back to the castle.
Because Lymond always figures out the locations he's in and walks around, so he knows the city better than Jerrod at this point. Also, just a side note, by the way, is I think that it's super subtle, but you can kind of start figuring out already. I think Lymond really likes Jerrod. Like he just likes Jerrod.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Jerrod cannot stand him at all, but you just get these little hints of like, no, Lymond like really likes this guy.
I think Lymond sees in Jerrod a flawed person that he can help sort of set on the right path.
Yeah, and also they were childhood friends.
Mm-hmm.
Jerrod is super competent. He's also super hot. Lymond just likes him.
Yeah. And I mean, it's certainly a pattern with Lymond, right? These sort of
adopting strays and trying to
adopting
get them on the right path.
Young men who have serious issues and need to be mentored, and so.
And I think that we can all agree that he knows that Graham Reed Mallet is not the right person for Jerrod to be infatuated with. Lymond sees right through Gabriel, whether it's for evil or for just being manipulative in a strange way. So
yeah, I do feel like Lymond has a better sense of Gabriel than we do.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not true, but I feel like we are not getting from the narrator Lyman's perspective on on Gabriel. So
Well, Lyman does know what Gabriel had in his coat when he tried to escape Medina, which we are not entirely sure of yet. So if there is something insidious,
right, that's right. I forgot about
trying
that.
to do,
Yeah.
Lyman is aware of it and just hasn't sort of let on to Gabriel that he knows it all, because Gabriel unconscious when he found that letter. So
right. And we're just not in Lyman's perspective enough to, or at all, to get his sense of what's going on. Yeah.
We do get his perspective later in this part of the book.
Yeah. Okay, so then this whole Jerott says he's going back to the castle. You're like, I'm going back to the castle. Lyman replies with bravo sardonically. And then Jarrett's Jerott felt his anger rise and flood the vacant places of his fear. For Lyman had only said run, and the implication of choice was worse than an insult. It was the last animal smear on his honor. So, and then it just says, through all that was to come that night, Jerott Blythe behaved like a madman, hugging that single word to him.
Jerott is the most melodramatic character, I think, in the whole series. Going back to, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, it's almost like for Jerott, it doesn't matter that Lyman didn't run, that he, like, at the end of this whole thing, when Jerott knows, like, oh, Lyman didn't run away, he actually came back to save them. Like, that doesn't matter because Lyman implied that Jerott would run. And so therefore his honor is so besmirched that he's so mad about it. You just want to go like, ah.
It's Jerott. I mean, it does raise a question of, like, Lyman is he very, like, kind of keeps Jerott at a distance and says these kind of hurtful things to him. And it makes you wonder why. Why is he that way toward Jerott? And I think the answers can be guessed at. One is by looking at how Gabriel is with Jerott, and the other is looking at how Lyman was with Robin Stewart and what he learned from that experience. So I sort of think he's intentionally trying not to seduce Jerott, but let Jerott come to his own conclusions. Which is really funny because then this section ends with Jerott accusing him of seducing him.
Yes. It's like Lyman is eternally damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. Like, yeah.
So when we go, we had the scene in the, what is it called? Where the arms are?
Battery, stockade.
Whatever it is. And we were in there before and we saw that it was a Roman bathhouse, and we get it again, this reminder that it's a Roman bathhouse, and this amazing image of the arsenal, that's the word.
Oh yeah.
The yellow lamps shone peacefully on the obliterated weaving wall dancers who in 1,000 years had seen and suffered worse than this. So the fact that this whole thing happens in a crumbling over 1,000-year-old Roman bath just is the most cool, like, visual imagery, and I love it so much.
Yeah. It's very cool. How much of Tripoli is still there? Do we know?
I was looking it up at some point, but I don't remember anymore.
I definitely want to, now that we're out of Tripoli, I definitely want to go on like a Google image search of old Tripoli and see what it looks like.
Definitely.
Go there in your travels, Laura?
I don't know if you can go there. I don't know if it's safe.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Oh, because, yeah.
What country is it in? I don't remember.
Lebanon?
Oh.
I think.
Yeah, maybe not.
Let's see what the Google says.
Thought it was on the north coast of Africa somewhere.
It is. My mom went all over North Africa a couple years ago.
Libya.
Yeah. Oh, my mom went to Tripoli like a couple of years ago. I'll see if she has.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was visiting friends. It's like, I knew this sounded really familiar. As soon as you said Libya, I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, I'll ask and see if she has pictures. We have friends who live there. We could go to Tripoli. Yeah.
Oh my God, let's go.
I totally have friends in Tripoli. Let's go.
Well, not anytime soon.
Yeah, not right now.
The pandemic is over. battle map. Historic map of Tripoli. Oh, that gives us...
Okay.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So that the Châtelet is probably on one of those like
On one of those little islands. I
they say
wonder if the boat, the ship that they sneak away on is sort of like on the edge of the harbor where they could sneak away easily. Interesting.
Gets hot.
apparently.
Oh, let's go there.
Great. I don't like hot. Okay, so when we look at this whole scene, with the cannon, the fuse and the fire and the sort of the cannonball solution and all of that, I didn't really write any notes on it just because I just loved reading it. Like, it was just this wonderful action sequence. So I'm not sure, I don't have a lot to say about this section other than just, it was really fun to read.
It's awesome. Yeah, no, I have the same thing. I have very few notes. I absolutely love it. I wrote down a couple things. One of them is the way that Jerott comes in and Lymond is already in control of the situation. And it says, a familiar voice, unfamiliarly crisp, said, Blythe, I want a locksmith, a crossbow and bolts, blah, blah, etc. And I just wrote competence kink. This is my favorite character trope, is like, he's so competent. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
And all his the next line, his whole gimcrack battery of flourishes swept clean to concentrate on speed, deftness, and on, Jerott realized, his sense of hearing. So like all the airs that he puts on, all the ridiculousness is like gone, and he's just like super in the moment trying to save everybody.
Yeah, and there's this moment like towards the end of the scene where they go into the fire, and so it's the bottom of 214, top of 215, where it says, then Francis Crawford, axe in hand, a drenched cloth flung around his head, darted into the fog. Jerott followed. And so I like that sense that, like, as much as I'm annoyed with Jerott and his hyper dramatic whatever nonsense, he's really brave, and is and he wants to follow. Like, I think he wants to do the right thing, and so I just love that. Like, Lymond's like throws this wet cloth around his head to try and survive this fire, and Jerott just right after him goes in to help. So
I think this is why Lymond really likes Jerott, because Jerott is super capable and competent and brave. Like, Lymond sees all these appealing things in him, actually.
Yeah. And he's very competent and he knows what he's doing.
There's a part,
being a teenager about it.
So there's a part you skipped over. I'm going to read it. It's on 210. It's as Jerott is about to go in, he's going to open the last door, and he's afraid that the air from opening the door could kill them all. The opening of this door in his hand was his entrance card at 25 to heaven or hell.
Yeah. I caught on that.
Yeah.
So that he and Lymond were at the battle when they were
right.
I'm just saying.
Right.
Oh,
very good point.
I
do
didn't
remember. Do we remember if he's older or younger?
I'm not giving you any more hints.
Pretty much the same age.
Huh?
I said I think they're pretty much the same age.
I think Lymond's a little bit younger than him.
Maybe.
Okay, well, that's a good sign. So he's at the most, he's in his mid-20s.
We've got an age range, finally.
Yes. So I'm still guessing early. I think he's 24 or 25. I mean, 23 or 24. But
I would concur with that.
I love how she buries that in this massive, like, intense action sequence so that you almost miss it.
I totally missed it.
I mean, I remember reading that line, but I didn't even think that they're the same age. So
yeah.
I missed it, but I caught it. So
that was so funny. I was so focused on what was happening. Again, her sliding all this description in the midst of sentences that are saying other things is
and no word is wasted, man. And she really likes to like hide little hints in here.
Yeah. It's great. I love it.
I really like in this section how Dunnett keeps ratcheting up the tension, even from the very beginning. Like when Jerott first gets to the castle, like almost immediately the sky ignites with fire. And at this point I thought, oh, well, it blew up, like they were too late. but it's literally just the Turkish gunfire starting up again. And like there's several moments where like they do things to make things better, but it just keeps getting worse. Like when Lymond shoots the crossbow bolt at the stockade, the pile of cannonballs, to try and divert the flow of the fuse. It does divert the flow of the fuse, but it just sets the actual arsenal on fire inside.
Yeah.
And
like it was a good, like it was like good try. You know, like you had to try it, and it just
well, I mean, if he didn't do that, it probably the fuse would have gotten to it and blown it up. So it was
he bought them a
absolutely
little more time.
necessary, but it also made things worse.
Yeah.
And like just the tension for the poor the lock picker.
Oh,
You know, like I was imagining like all those tried and true and overused moments in movies where like the bomb diffuser has like 10 seconds left. It's like, well, I'm dead if I do it wrong, and I'm dead if I don't do anything at all. So I just got to keep going. So
yeah, it's like your heart is in your throat reading it.
Yeah, it was definitely a bomb countdown
Yeah.
scene, like the whole thing. It was great.
So there's this great moment right before Lymond shoots the cannonballs, and he asks anyone play pelota right as he's about to do it. Said Lymond, a last faint, grim smile on his lips, and for a second, a living flash of recognition and greeting, and he supposed farewell, passed from his blue eyes to Jerott. Then he aimed, wound, and shot. So right before he takes this action where he thinks he's going to die, he looks in Jerott's eyes and shares this moment of humanity and greeting and goodbye with him, which again is why I say that I think Lymond really likes Jerott. Jerott is his closest thing he has to a peer and a friend in this moment.
Yeah. Also, I thought it was interesting. This is later in the scene, right? Like when they're sort of, they think they're going to die. And he says, at the bottom of 216, he says, Lymond opened bloodshot eyes on Jerott Blythe and intoned rashly, receive the Lord's yoke, for it is easy and light. We promise you bread and water without any dainties and a modest habit of small worth. And then he says, are you adequately supplied with water, Brother Blythe? Is this what the order promises them? Like with that line, is that sort of the promise when they swear to the order, that's what they get? Okay.
Yeah, well, and the last thing he says there, your habit leaves something to be desired. So he's making a joke about Jerott's clothes being all destroyed.
Right. Yeah, right. I love that. It's like they're on the death's doorstep and Lymond is joking about fashion.
Of course.
And then this right after this is where Jerott says you should thank him on your knees, meaning God, and Lymond doesn't answer. I think because Lymond is so exhausted. And then Jerott added, picturesquely, you draw your strength from the devil to seduce men.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Because like Lymond was not in any way trying to seduce him at all. But I think that Jerott was getting seduced anyway because Lymond is so awesome. He's projected himself onto Lymond. Like, I'm attracted to you. This must be your fault.
Right. He's just so confident. He just saved them in this like super dramatic way. And Jerott is just like, this guy. And then like, damn it. What did you do?
You must be doing this on purpose to fuck with me.
Yeah.
And then we get a little tiny bit of Lymond point of view where we see how exhausted he is.
Yeah.
Men were coming towards them. He would have to walk to talk, to think, to act. And then that's where he says, oh, Christ, Jerott, you've got one hero too many already. Stand on your own feet, brother. It's good for the soul.
Yeah. In other words, like, don't put me up with Gabriel. Because it's like, dude, this is not good for you.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to Robin Stewart, I think he really doesn't want to be in that situation of being on somebody's pedestal.
Yeah.
So he keeps pushing Jerott away.
Right. Yeah. And yet I think it's interesting when you think about Robin, like, was the problem with Robin that he idealized Lymond, or was the problem that Lymond wasn't real with him ever? And so like
when he needed it.
Yeah, and so like Lymond might see this as, oh, Robin put me on a pedestal and that's what caused disaster. but maybe the disaster was caused by the fact that he never like sort of took Robin under his wing and like showed him the reality of what was going on. Just like with Will Smith, you know, back when Will Smith betrayed him Will Scott two books ago, where he, you know, he got so mad, and if Lymond had just been like, hey, here's the situation, this is what we're doing, this is why, he wouldn't have, you know, done the whole betrayal thing. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, we've had a couple times where Lymond, he got really upset that people put him on a pedestal and that people kind of idealized him. And so I think that he, you know, he even has a thing that people keep dying for me. You know, this is I seem to be armored with scythes, right? So I think he really, really doesn't want anyone else to die for him. And so I think he's really, really trying not to let Jerott idealize him in that way. And I think also he probably longs for a peer, not a disciple.
Right.
Yeah. But interestingly, like the whole I don't want people to die for me thing is a little bit like, you can read that as I'm going to take agency away from people, because you know, if someone chooses to do that, that's their choice, you know, and that is it his place to determine other people's decisions? And is that an arrogant move on his part to say, I know better what it is that will keep people safe, or even to say that keeping people safe is a better choice? Like, maybe there are people who don't want to be safe. And
right. I mean, Christian chose to die for him. I mean, she didn't know she was going to die, but she would have made that.
She chose to risk.
Yeah. But he's the one left behind who keeps getting left behind. So you can understand emotionally where he's coming from.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Totally agree. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Secrets.
So I love the inquiry into the tomb in which nobody died.
But everybody.
Okay. So they have this sort of like what happened and kind of a little bit of debrief over the whole thing. The Spanish Knights are clearly like, they've got an agenda. They're sort of looking at each other. And then I thought this was interesting. So Jerott knows that Lymond has left Tripoli. And it says, not that he cared, but he was too damn tired to trouble to tell them that Lymond wasn't in Tripoli. So they had this whole inquiry, and Jarrett's like, yeah, I just can't deal with the hassle of dealing with this. So he doesn't do it. And you kind of wonder, like, maybe he just deep down didn't want to betray Lymond to these people, and he's just using the being tired as an excuse, or he just doesn't want to deal with the hassle of it. I don't know.
Could be probably a mix of both. I don't know. And Jerott definitely has like a lot of conflicting emotions and a complete lack of self-understanding and awareness. So
yeah, right.
But just that he popped out with that line about seduction, like some part of him is already seduced by Lymond.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And he thinks, and it's like, it's such a strong seduction that he thinks the devil's involved. Like,
it must be the devil's fault that I feel this way.
Yeah, that's pretty bold.
So if he sees that he's being seduced by Lymond, or at least in his mind's eye, that's what's happening. Does he feel the same way about Gabriel? Did Gabriel seduce him into, you know, being such a sort of follower of his?
Or does he see like the attraction to Gabriel and by extension the knights as like, oh no, this is godly. Like, I've been seduced by God.
Yeah, Gabriel is godly. Lymond's seduction is from the devil.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, there's a metaphysical poem by John Donne, who is a poet that I love, but he talks a lot about like the seduction of God, like that God would ravish me and all of this. He uses very sexual language to talk about God in ways that are super cool. So,
apropos for this book.
Yeah. Donnet would be aware of that. So
all right, should we move on to the next chapter?
Yes, chapter 9. Here we go. Okay, so this chapter is all about Lyman and Una get reunited in the Turkish camp. There's this whole escape plot. Tripoli does surrender. There's the escape thing that happens. Lyman gets caught. He has this lovely little interaction with Dragut that we'll talk about when we get there. And then the surrender just goes to pieces for several reasons. And then Lyman and Gabriel and Thompson sail away at the end of the chapter. So that's kind of the quick summary of what happens. So much is going on. This chapter was insane. Yeah. So.
All right, I'll jump in because I have a note on the first page. I like this description of Una. Unthinkingly strong all her life, her flesh a mere vessel for the violent, untamed artistry of the mind. She's just, I actually really love Una. I think she's great, and I wish her life had not sucked so much.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a point later where she says something about how if she was 10 years younger, that Lyman would be the love of her life. Like, oh.
Well, and there's all these little bits throughout this chapter where you realize how head over heels in love with him she is, and how she believes it's an impossibility and tries to deny to herself and tries to shut down her feelings, but she can't help it.
Yeah. And that she also equally believes that, like, she's bad for him, you know, that somehow, like, that her being with her would be damaging to him, or that she would bring something not good into his life, which is such a sad reflection of her concept of herself and what she brings.
Exactly. I feel like if she was a male character, she would be the Whoopi that everybody was trying to, like, protect. How can you hate yourself? You're so much. You're so cool and capable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we have her interacting with Gabriel, and this is an interesting thing. She discovered a humbly used skill in social salvage, which he used with delicacy. In the short periods he spent with her, his lack of sentiment, the absence of prying, moral or otherwise, his complete disinterestedness were dearly appreciated opiates for her pride. Mm-hmm. Do you think that his lack of interest is done as an opiate for her pride? Because you could also just read it as him not being interested.
Or I wondered if it was a facade, that he is actually deeply interested in her fate and what is happening to her, and he wants exactly what happens to her to happen, and he orchestrates it that way. And it is not a disinterestedness on his part, but he has this facade of, like, you know, oh, I don't really care what happens to you, you know, like nothing. That, like, there's, yeah, I don't think it's genuine, and it's certainly not of benefit to her in any way. Like, whether he's disinterested or not, there's no part of him that is at all interested in benefiting her life, except as a side consequence.
Well, he seems to completely believe her really damaged belief that she would be bad for Lyman. Like, he takes it as a given, right? That of course she would be bad for Lyman. Of course they must be separated for Lyman's own good.
Right. And I kind of wondered if he just thought, well, any woman is a complicating factor and we have to get her away. Like, I'm not even sure it was specifically Una that he thought was bad. I just think she's a complicating factor in any plans that he has for Lyman. Like, why wouldn't he want this variable out of the way that he can't control?
So there's a point where he tells her, she's talking about letting Lyman believe she's dead, and he says, you should have been a queen. You maintain what is right when the man in question lies less than 20 yards from your bed. So, like, he's flattering her at the same time as he's playing into her self-hatred.
Yeah.
Okay, so talking about, Lyman, who, had she been born 10 years later, might have been her first and only love. And then she says, she had set out one night to seduce him, and he had forestalled her and taken her soul. Like, without a doubt, she's in love with him.
Yep. Yep, for sure. And yeah, so then there's just that whole her memory of that scene from Queen's Play. It's so sad. Okay, so can we read that? Well, I guess it's on the next page. We have this. No, not yet. We're not there yet. Never mind.
We're not there yet. We'll read it when we get there.
Yeah, Lymond and Una. So they have this reunion.
Yes.
And yeah.
So in their reunion, there's a couple of great lines in there. One is, of a denser blue, his eyes did not cleanse with their candor like Gabriel's. Instead, there was a shock of his laughter, mocking, tantalizing, real, which is a great, I think, a great contrast between the two. You know, Gabriel has this holiness to him, and Lymond has this like vitality and this life. His face came to life with it.
Yeah, there's a realness and a sort of solidness about Lymond that, I don't know, Gabriel doesn't have.
And then there's this great, like, you're in her point of view, and this is when they're reuniting. And it says, the desert, the hot breath of the seraglio, the gunfire had all gone. Like in that moment, all that she is aware of is him and being back together with him.
Yeah.
But then they share this kiss, and she weeps on his shoulder. And then after this, it's shortly after this, in the next page or two, where she thinks about the kiss, and she says that it was in friendship only.
Mm-hmm.
So something about that kiss made her realize that he's not in love with her the way she's in love with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Did we do, wait, where is that kiss?
224. He greets her.
Yeah.
Tell me you're practicing for the vows yourself. It seems a desperate waste of natural talent. And then he says, then I'd better study the entire subject again.
Yeah. Right. So he's not, or at least from her perspective, he's not into her.
Then he kissed her fully on her cold mouth, and the blood ran through her fine skin in pain and thankfulness, and she wept with her black hair fallen on his shoulder and arm while the pulse of his heart beat quietly against her cheek. And I wonder if she could tell from, like, maybe his heart's not racing, or just the way he kisses her, that it's in friendship and it's not like a passionate, you know, I can't hold myself back from you kind of thing.
Right. They do this whole bit about the escape plan. You know, like, and is Tripoli gonna fall? Lymond's like, of course it's gonna fall. Like, he's so annoyed with anyone who doesn't see what's going on. And then I think this is, you know, from Una's perspective, it says there was a pause watching the two men, both fair, both self-contained and prodigiously. Something like that. Sorry. I do speak English. Is my prodigally gifted. Una sensed that the query was more pressing than even it seemed, that more was at stake than the impugnment of what was the greatest order of chivalry the world had ever known. And so I thought that was interesting. Like, more is at stake here than just this discussion about Tripoli and the Knights.
Yeah. So. Well, Lymond's future is what's at stake, and they have this super, again, this very dramatic exchange where Lymond is saying, you know, this isn't my affair. Like, Diomedes is a terrible leader. There's nothing I can do about it. It's not my problem. And Gabriel is like, no, you will never return, said Gabriel with bitterness.
I love, he's like, well, I gotta leave first. It's just like, come on, I'm not God yet.
I just love how every time Gabriel is so holy, Lymond is just so flippant.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you know, when Tripoli's actually fallen, talk to me again.
And Gabriel's like, there may be a miracle. And I'm, no, it's gonna fall.
Probably not a miracle. Yeah.
But then there's also this wonderful line that ends that section with Una, where Lymond says, "We were always on the same side, you and I. Only Mokri, we did not always know it." And that's that same Gaelic phrase that Oliamro said that means my heart.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong. Sorry.
Sad.
Yeah, but I think it is in friendship. I think he does really like her. He's just not. He doesn't seem, at least from her point of view, to be passionately in love with her.
Right. And yet, as we talked about like earlier in the book, and I think she's kind of aware of this too, like she's kind of why he went to Malta to some extent. So like,
I know, right? He definitely
certainly cares about her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess,
like she was so determined that he wouldn't come over to Goza. So like she obviously knows that he cares about her enough that she warned him off from rescuing her. So
but it's interesting, right? Because we're in her point of view, so we don't know for sure, right? Because she has low self-esteem and she thinks low of herself.
Right.
She thinks she doesn't deserve him. So is she misinterpreting? And maybe he does really love her, and she just can't even fathom that that's a possibility.
Right.
I don't think we have enough information at this point to know.
Right. No. What I meant was like, she obviously knows that he cares about her enough that she had to warn him off. So like, even if she does think, oh, he doesn't love me or whatever, he does genuinely care for her. And she does know that to some extent.
Yeah. But she thinks she's not worth it and doesn't deserve it.
Yeah.
And he'd be better without her, and she's going to destroy his future, right? That's what she thinks in the next section, whose future she had lately extinguished.
Ugh. Yeah. Okay. So now we get this section.
Yes.
What in the world is going on? Okay, so one thing that I think is interesting is that she never says his name. The author never says his name in the whole section. So then the question is it not Lymond who comes to her in this whole section? And if it's not Lymond, who is it? So
I think this little section can be read, and it's brilliant the way she does it. This is either Lymond, which goes against what she said in the last book, where it was only the one night thing, or this is a completely depraved Gabriel completely taking advantage of the situation.
But isn't Gabriel like way taller and bigger than Lymond? I mean, it's
dark. He's just slipping into her tent.
Yeah. I mean, granted, we have had instances in this before where people have completely have had sex with someone and completely misunderstood their body shape and type. So like, obviously it's possible.
When did that happen before?
In Queen's Play, all the time.
Oh, right. Yes, all that daddy boy sex.
Yeah, all that daddy boy stuff. So clearly Dunnett does write that, so we know that that's a possibility. But yeah, I don't think this is Lymond in this scene. And so can we read that quote from Queen's Play again? For people watching, I'm in a different space and I don't have my Queen's Play copy. So the whole time I was reading this section of the chapter, I'm like, what did that quote say?
All right, so it's on the bottom of 410, and it says, "For one night he had severed Una O'Dwyer's soul from her mind. For one single night she was free. It was the first time and the last."
Okay, so that could be read, for one single night she was free. It was the first time and the last. You could read that line as it's the first and last time she's ever free, not as it's the first and last time she's ever going to have sex with Lymond, which is how I read it the first time. I read it the first time. It was the first and last time they would be together. Okay, so it's ambiguous. I still feel like this scene is not Lymond, though, in this book.
I mean, if we're going with the evil Gabriel theory, then I could totally see it being Gabriel. I mean, he's got the silvery blonde hair. The one thing he does say is Mokri, which is something that Gabriel overheard Lymond say in the last section. And even right at the end, after doing the deed, she starts thinking about Graham Reed Mallett's voice saying, sacrifice, sacrifice. It's like, perhaps the tone of the way he said that made her think of Graham Reed's voice. I don't know.
He does whisper it, which when people whisper, their voices are much less distinct. So like the fact that he only talks to her in a whisper in this scene, maybe
there's got to be a reason why Dunnett does not make this clear, and I think it can easily be interpreted either way.
Yeah. Anytime like the person in question in a scene is not specific, I get so suspicious. I'm like, it's not the person we think it is, or it's not the person that it's implied to be. And yeah.
So there's an interesting parallel here on. I'll just read it's on 225 when Gabriel comes in when Lymond and Una are talking, and it says, "None of us knows the Lord's will," said Gabriel's quiet voice, and the sun blazed on the deep carpet and was extinguished again as he came in. And then 2 pages later, when the lover comes to the tent to see Una, a stray beam from the closing curtain struck Silver once from his fair head, and finding her, he knelt. So I feel like there's this image of Gabriel coming in the tent that then could potentially, if this is Gabriel, is like a parallel with you just saw him come in the sunlight, now you're seeing him come in the moonlight kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm not 100% convinced it's Gabriel in this scene, but I'm like 75% convinced. Like, I think it is.
Yeah, I'm thinking it is, which is like 100% proof that he's horrible, because it's totally taking advantage of her in this situation.
Okay, so if it is Gabriel in this scene, it tells us a lot about him. So he's willing to basically rape a woman because she's having sex with him without consent. He is completely and with malice aforethought violating his vows to the order. So clearly his whole faith thing is performative and perhaps not genuine. And he's just like, someone who would do this is just a horrible person. And he was able to pull it off, which means, you know, smart and manipulative and all of that. So
yeah, and it's not like Lymond, if it's not Lymond, it's not like he can ever figure it out because of what happens next. Like, they've never had the discussion. It's not like he'd be like, wait, no, we didn't have sex last night.
Right. And if Gabriel did it, like, he knew that Una would be silent all the next day because she can't speak, because she doesn't speak Arabic. And the plan, as we find out later, is to recapture both of them very quickly. And he assumes that they're not going to get very far in their escape plan. Certainly not far enough to have any sort of discussion, even though they do get farther than he planned. But yeah. Yep, totally.
So I'm not going to say who I think it was because it's probably too spoilery.
You know who it was?
I know who it was. I think it's written ambiguously, but I know who it was.
Is there a definitive answer? Does it come out later?
It's never explicitly answered. Okay. I don't think. Fans fight about it all the time, which is why when you started off our discussion, as a person, you said I knew what you were going to say, because there's all these arguments about it on mailing lists about who it was. But I'm certain I know who it was.
I just think it was Gabriel. Like,
I think so too.
Yeah.
That's kind of, just because of the ambiguous way it's written, I was like, why wouldn't she just make it clear that it's Lymond? There's got to be a reason behind this.
Yeah.
Which totally is why I'm now like 90 or 85-15 or 90-10 even, that Gabriel is this horrible person. Because if it is him, he's a shit.
Also, I feel like if Lymond was going to sneak back into her tent to have sex with her, like, the earlier scene would be a little bit different.
Yeah.
And like, it just, I don't know, it just seems out of character. And especially because when you think about the last time they had sex, and it was, yeah, it was just described. I don't know. I just feel like in the middle of this intense Turkish camp thing, the two of them coming together would be described in a different way, and the emotional consequences of it would be a lot stronger and all of that. Like, it's sort of like it happened and then they don't say anything about it afterwards. Like, even though, yes, they're caught up in the escape and all of that, I don't know. It just seems weird. So I think it was Gabriel.
So we also have this in later soberer weeks when bitterly she began to wonder if ever she had had the means to attract. She was to wonder if in that brief passage Lymond had hoped for oblivion as she had once received it from him. And this just makes me so sad. And it's an interesting line too, because it tells you that she doesn't die because she lives for weeks later. So you already know that when he thinks she's dead, she's not dead.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I just feel awful for her even more.
Yeah.
Although that being said, I could totally see drowning being the way she dies eventually, just because of the way they keep talking about her as like a sea creature and
yeah, that's true.
symbology. Like, as soon as she started swimming and saying, I can't swim, I instantly feared. It's like, oh no. But then you're right. It says right here that she doesn't. So
Yeah. That's very true. If she does die in water, it would seem to be reasonable based on the descriptions of her this whole time. Yeah. That's sad.
yeah.
Okay, so then we get this whole description of like the situation in Tripoli and discussing the surrender in Tripoli, and is Duvalier going to be a hostage, and Una saying goodbye to Galatian, which we could talk about, and then Una and Lymond begin their escape. So is there any bit in this whole discussion of the situation in Tripoli that you guys wanted? I didn't really mark anything in it, so.
This is real quick. I made a note about how Una, she tried in spite of her contempt to find the right words when she's saying goodbye to Galatian. Like she starts like trying to say kind things. And then in the end, she just tells him off and storms out. She doesn't have like the patience and compassion to deal with this asshole. She's just done with him. Yeah. She tries. At least she tries.
He doesn't seem to have reformed in any way, shape, or form. No, like this terrible situation that he's in has not caused him to have any sort of like dark night of the soul or anything. So
yeah. Philippe, what were you gonna say?
On page 28, it's just a little line. It was Gabriel who waylaid Dragut while tempers were rising, and as a businessman might. So we get the sense that Gabriel has Dragut's ear and that he sort of listens to him from time to time. So we can feasibly assume that Gabriel might be up to some not so good things.
Shenanigans.
Such as letting Dragut know, hey, you might want to be at this ship in a while because Lymond and Una are going to try and escape.
Well, there's also, we had the sequence earlier where Gabriel negotiated Una to go into Dragut's Seraglio. So we know they're on like negotiating terms. And there's also a line earlier in this chapter about how Gabriel's guards basically let him go wherever he wants.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We get from Gabriel's perspective where at the end of at the top of 232 where he says he's saying like no fear is showing on her face, nor was it any spiritual faith which sustained her, as Gabriel well knew, but a fatalistic mystical trust in Francis Crawford. And he betrays them. Gabriel does.
Yeah, I really love their escape sequence because she's so brave and he's so brave and it looks like it's gonna work, and she's like the happiest she's been, just helping carry water and like do the work, whatever the work they're doing is, and then like everything's going right and then it all goes to hell. And I love this. she had something as near happiness as she had probably ever attained. Like, I would never have expected that in this escape sequence where she's in this immense danger and she has to play mute, and at any point they could figure out that it's her, but she actually just like enjoys this day of like working with her hands. Like, this is who she is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this line about her, all her despised feminine feebleness had vanished, like right before that bit about happiness. And it just gives you a sense of like her being born a woman in the 1500s, like set her fate in a lot of ways. I think perhaps in her own mind, but also in reality, that if she had been a man, like her life would have been, her skills and her competencies and would have just played out so differently.
Yeah, she wouldn't have had to try to work through a Cormac. She would have been able to take action on her own right.
Yeah.
And there's also a great line. She was not afraid. Dusk hid her identity. Her wit had no frontiers.
Mm. Yeah.
So then I love the sequence as they row out or as they swim out and he's carrying her, and it's like peaceful and beautiful. And then there's this moment where he speaks, and that's where she realizes how much like effort he's expended and how he has almost no breath because he's been swimming and swimming and swimming and carrying her, and he's exhausted, and the water is like hurting his burns, the salt water. And yet he's done it in this way with kindness and laughter and like making sure she doesn't worry, and it's just super beautiful. Yeah. Love, even if he's not in love with her, he loves her, and he put so much into saving her.
Yeah. That section of time of them swimming that she refers to it as timeless. This timeless porterage, it had cost him so much, and you're just like, oh, like this moment out of time.
And then it's so scary, and they get attacked, and everybody's gonna hurt him, and you're like, no.
Yeah. So then just that image of like these janissaries fishing for him, and just
you're definitely kind of tricked into thinking that she may have let herself drown, thinking he was about to drown, but if you're paying attention, you know that she lives because of the thing about weeks later.
Yeah.
And then Thompson, when he goes looking, he sees that there was another skiff missing from the brigantine, so we can extrapolate from that how she got away.
Yeah, and but Thompson so annoyed me in this moment. I was just like, I wrote at the top because he's just kind of like, this is probably what happened, and then he's like, he was pleasantly tired, so he went off to bed.
Just like, I mean, he tried. He's like, all right, I'll try and save her. She's not here. All right.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, he didn't look all that hard. Like, okay.
Yeah. It's very true to his character. I like that it's not too sentimental. He like Lymond saves him. He's grateful, but like he's not going to put that much effort into saving Lymond's, mistress.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So then they are. Una's fate is unknown, if you weren't paying too much attention to the previous line about weeks later, and Lymond has been recaptured. So then we get this whole bit about the governor Duvalier being chained up, and it's so shocking, that they're the ambassador is trying to fix this disaster of diplomacy, which is completely broken down and unsuccessfully. And he walks into this situation where he identifies Lymond and just,
yeah,
buddy. But anyway.
So I really love the sequence where they bring Lymond in and he's all beaten up and they throw him on the ground and Dragut kicks him. And there's this great, like, Lymond's stained lids were heavily closed and his bruised and blistered skin sparkled with salt. And then Dragut asks him if he's their lover, like the lover of one of the men.
That was expressly forbidden in Christianity.
Yeah.
And so I remember, and he talks about killing him by this custom of soaking him in honey and burying him in the sand. So when I read this, I was like, oh shit, like this is going to go really bad. And then it's like, surprise, Dragut is pretending and Dragut actually is his friend.
Yeah.
Like, what?
I was kind of expecting something though, because it had said earlier, we had mention of Gabriel or of Lymond knowing him.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wait a second. As soon as he showed up with Lymond, I was kind of like, wait, something's going to happen here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did think it interesting that when he does say that bit about, is he your lover? And then we get this, from the darkness, Gabriel's deep voice spoke, in the Christian world, these things are forbidden. But it's almost, there's a little bit of like, that doesn't mean they don't happen. It's just that they're forbidden.
I mean, I think, you know, you can read this whole thing multiple ways. The idea that Gabriel wants him is not unsupported in the text. So
Yeah. And it's also interesting that Gabriel's the one that answers that question.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there were several people there, you know. But
so,
yeah, then we get this great thing with Dragut. So
I was gonna say also Lymond's reaction to finding out about Una's death is really interesting. His face became not unpleasingly blank. His eyes opened to their fullest extent, a beautiful and unusual blue. And then lightly he spoke. Dear me, and who's going to tell the governor of Gozo, he said. So like, knowing him as we know him, he's completely devastated. And being Lymond, he puts on this blank facade to protect himself and not let anyone see what he's feeling. And then like this next sequence, we actually go into his point of view and we see how devastated he is. And there's this great line where he wakes up and he's thinking, you know, he had been washed, patched, blah, blah, blah. There was a guard outside the tent. Una was dead. Like, that's what he's thinking. He's devastated.
Yeah. I did wonder, though, there's that line right up before we get to Lymond's perspective where he says, you know, dear me, and who's going to tell the governor of Gozo? And then Gabriel says, oh, my son, said Graham Mallet quietly and turned away suddenly into the dark. And so it just made me, it seems to imply that like Gabriel it sees through Lymond's facade easily of his indifference in this moment. I mean, but it could be just that he knows he's not indifferent. So,
or it could be frustration at his being blasé at someone's death, right? I'm holy, how dare you be blasé?
Yeah, that's true. Totally. Yeah. So then we get this bit in Gabriel's perspective.
In Lymond's perspective.
Lymond's perspective. Lost my brain.
I was like, really?
I've got vacation brain. Lymond's perspective. So what else did you want to point out here?
Well, this whole exchange about the angel. What do you guys make of that?
Yeah.
I had to read this whole section at least 3 times because like, what is happening here? And I'm still not 100% sure I know, except that Dragut is telling him to go back to Scotland. So
the way that I read it, I think the key part of this story is the bit where he says, but in the end, Dragut peaceably, the peacock angel was made by Allah, Lord over all the rest. So the idea is that this angel has enabled things to happen, and like Adam is created and Eve is created, and then Allah makes the angel Lord over everything. And so then he says, carry with thee this tale. A hunter went killing sparrows one cold day, and his eyes gave forth tears as he went. Said one bird to another, behold, this man weeps. Said the other, turn thine eyes from his tears, watch his hands. So like this feels like a huge warning from Dragut that's like, don't pay attention to what people say. Don't pay attention to how they look. Watch what they do. And yeah.
The same applies to Lymond, by the way. He's always putting on a facade most of the time. But if you watch what he does, and if you literally watch Lymond's hands, you'll understand better what's going on with him.
Yeah, you've mentioned that several times, to watch his hands when you're not quite sure where he's at. So
yeah. And then he says, like, I've always thought that they're in the talents for a wondrous peacock. In other words, directly comparing him to this angel that Allah had made Lord over the land. And then Lyman's reply is, "My God, in Scotland," swinging around mockery back in his voice, "an army of angels would merely dissolve in the rain." And then the Corsairs then take an army of men. So I sort of took it as Dragut telling Lyman, like, hey, go back and conquer Scotland. Like, Scotland is yours, or should be yours for the taking. And that he should be like an overt ruler of Scotland. And Lyman's like, no. and just kind of dismisses that idea. But then with that in mind, we get this, the decision that was to change the course of his life had to be taken in fatigue and distress, and with the echo of his own voice, then and always bright and cold in his mind. So what do we think this decision is that he's made at this point that affects the entire rest of his life?
I already know, so Philippe needs to answer.
The only thing I could think of is actually going back to Scotland at this point. I mean, that's just a simple thing, but I don't know.
I sort of took it, I was wondering if the decision is not necessarily to go back to Scotland or not to go back to Scotland, but if it's how is he going to go back to Scotland? Like, is he going to return with an army and be be an overt, take his place of power in Scotland overtly, or is he going to be more subtle and be more crafty in making his ends, like, I don't know, seeking his ends? But I have no idea. Like, I don't really know. And I do feel like maybe something also had to do with Gabriel. Like, is he going to, like, the whole watch his hands business, like, is he going to continue to go along with Gabriel but be suspicious? Is he going to denounce him? Is he going to accept what he says at face value? Like, is that part of the decision?
Yeah, that could definitely be a part of it.
I don't know.
Because I guess Dragut would know if Gabriel obviously has been sort of behind a lot of these things.
I mean, obviously Gabriel knows that I mean, Dragut knows that Gabriel is working against Lymond. I mean, he's betrayed his escape and has clearly conspired to have this woman that Lymond cares about hidden from him, and Dragut knows that.
Yeah.
So his whole like watch his hands thing is a not very veiled warning. So.
It's interesting because Dragut is kind of playing both sides here, because he lets Lymond believe that Una's dead, even though he knows she's not.
Right.
He also gives him a warning and lets him live.
Yeah. And I kind of wondered, like, does he do that because he is friends with Lymond and he let Gabriel convince him that Lymond believing Una is dead is better for Lymond? Because it doesn't seem like, I can't see Dragut being loyal in any particular way to Gabriel unless they negotiated something. Like, if Gabriel negotiated something that Dragut really wants out of that whole thing, but I don't know. Who knows?
I have one other comment in the section, which is we get Lymond looking suddenly desperately tired and sick and in doubt, which we almost never get Lymond like that. Lymond's always like, nothing showed. He was super fresh and clean and energetic, even after, craziness happens.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's at that state tells us a lot about how far he's like suffered in all this experience and how devastated he is about Una.
Yeah.
And then I think it's interesting that he's in that super, super, super vulnerable place when he makes this immense decision that changes the course of his life.
Yeah. Because I think my question about this decision is it a decision that leads him into disaster in his life? Like, has he made the wrong decision because he's so tired and exhausted and grief-stricken and all of that? Or has this conversation with Dragut been enough so that he makes the correct decision? Whatever. And I don't think we know at this point.
Yeah, you can't know yet. It does sound like an ominous decision, though.
Yeah.
But
Well, and then he ends up repeating the same thing he said when he found out Una died, the dear me, and he was going to tell the governor of Gozo. So
why is that echoing in his head? What's going on there?
I just think he's still overwrought by the loss of Una. And he really believes that she's gone now. Without ever knowing that she was pregnant, by the way.
I think it's also that because it's his own words, then and always bright and cold in his mind. I think he really hates himself.
Yeah, like, I mean, it was kind of a shitty thing to say at the news of someone he cares about being dead. And obviously he had reasons for saying it, but you can see him still like, why did I say that? You know, and that echoing for sure.
Because here's yet another person that's died due to his actions.
And he tried so hard to save her.
Not have that happen again.
Yep.
Boy, he's excited when he realizes she's still alive. Can't wait for that.
They both have some serious self-esteem problems, by the way. Just saying.
Yeah.
And then I also like how the next section starts with Jerott Blythe, told that Lymond could be depressed by the death of a mistress, would have cackled with laughter. Don't you just want to hit him? Don't you just want to smack him?
Yeah, like
knock some sense into him.
Ugh, jerk. But then we see this disaster of the surrender and like what happens and how it just turns into the whole like mix of Sinem Pasha and Duvalier and the Knights and like just this entire group of people. It's a diplomatic tragedy of
and this all happened. This is all history.
Yeah.
It's weird because every time I Google it, it's all very dry. But when you read it like this, it's like, wow, this is a disaster.
Yeah. So they surrender and they're just like grievously punished. And the ambassador is like pleading desperately for the people to be saved, like to save as many people as he can. And he's only partially successful, and
only after he pays out basically everything he owns on the ship.
Yeah. And he just doesn't. It's really sad, and more, which we find out later. But so then, I don't know. I didn't really comment on anything in this like sort of whole sad scene. But then we get this scene with Gabriel and Jerott on the sand, on 248. Which it was interesting. So they talk about Lymond. Jerott seems to have a concussion somehow because he lost his helmet. Poor guy. Yeah.
Gabriel seems to be quite kind to him and saves him.
He's like trying to protect him from the sun. He's like, lie still, my son, and trying to encourage him. Like they're begging, the ambassador is begging for your life. And so he tells him that Lymond is alive and on the ambassador's galley and all of that.
He has an interesting comment. No one should ever be certain of reading that young man's mind. He has this very weird way of talking about Lymond that's like, I love him so much, but also he's such a mess.
Mm-hmm.
So he must come to the order.
Yes.
It's the only way for him to be saved.
Or something. So they make it, they are released, but Diarmid himself, they had to go to the banquet, I guess. The governor and the ambassador had to go to the banquet, which I think is just an exercise in humiliation.
Well, yeah, and it gets used as an excuse to blame them. Like they were complicit. They even celebrated the fall of Tripoli at the banquet, even though they were forced to go to the banquet.
So it's sad. And then, of course, we get this last little bit where they had like Francis had saved the last remaining guys who were sort of the holdout fighters, and they were expecting to, you know, die, and they were going to never surrender, never give up, never surrender. And yet they were rescued, except for 10 of them died in an explosion. But
I think there's an interesting bit where Nicholas de Nicolay is observing the army, the conquering army. He was struck by the orderliness, you know, where drunkenness was a sin, and the way that they pray, and also then looking at Tripoli, the turreted walls still fair and strong, like the whole idea of one, this didn't have to happen, and then two, that this army they're not like evil supervillains. They're people just like.
And I think there's the huge implication throughout this entire section of the book is that the knights defeated themselves. Like, the Turks really didn't do anything except bombard the walls with cannon, which was completely expected. Like, of course they're going to do that. But what really defeated them was their lack of preparation, their lack of ability to deal with the people who were with them in Tripoli, and then their internal strife as a group.
Yeah, they were not a cohesive unit at all. Not only with all of the Calabrians and the slaves that were trying to help them fight, but even within the order, just how the French and the Spanish are after each other, and, you know.
Yeah. So they gave up after 5 days, even though the fort was intact. They had food, they had water, they had musicians, like, and they just surrendered. Yeah.
Well, of course Lyman's not going to join them. Why the hell would he join them?
It's crazy.
Maybe that's the decision he made. Maybe he decided, I am going to join the Knights. No, that's not it at all. But still.
At what point was he ever thinking about joining the Knights? When he went there, he was like, I'm going to recruit some mercenaries.
Yeah, no, that was never in the cards. So then we get surprise, Una is there, and the way that she's introduced again is so interesting. So we go back to Galatian, and it says, at his side, carried off and concealed so smoothly, so plausibly by the casual duplicity of Dragut and the gentle persuasiveness of Graham Mallet, was the woman from whom Francis Crawford had been saved. That is an interesting description of Una, that Lymond, these two men, Graham Mallet and Dragut, saved Lymond from Una.
Well, it's because we're in Una's point of view, and that's how she sees it as having happened.
Yeah, but it's just like, really? Yeah. So yeah, right. She sees it. But I also wonder if that was also the perspective of Graham Mallet and Dragut. Well, maybe not Graham. He's probably got other issues, but I don't know. It's just it's a whole weird thing. Like, why do they care? You know? Why do they care? This was a complicated plot. Like, why do they care?
Yeah, what is so important about separating these two? I mean, I know from Graham's point of view, Gabriel's point of view, it's part of his conquest of Lymond, as we shall say.
I mean,
why didn't they just kill her? Like, I mean, it could be just that the Turks are definitely being portrayed as more compassionate than, in some ways, than the Knights and the Europeans.
Well, I think Gabriel definitely didn't kill her because he assumes that her child is Lymond's.
Yeah, but does he want to do anything with this baby? Like,
I mean, he's really interested in that baby, especially
with the Turks.
That was what the whole discussion was with Dragut earlier in the book.
So does he have some sort of master plan that she's going off with the Turks, and when the baby's born, something specific is going to happen with this kid? Like,
possible. This is why I know that she's not out of the books yet, because there's this whole plot hanging left with her unborn child. So
yeah, it just seems super like this. So this whole section, like the whole okay, so she knew it was a trap. She and Lymond had never been intended to escape, only to be separated so that she might convincingly appear to die. Okay, so if that's the case, if her perception of what's happening here is true, that whole plan was like involved to the point of the Queen's Play guy, except it worked. Like it was like this ridiculously dramatic, involved plot that in this case was executed by two competent people who made it work, as opposed to the idiot from the last book, whose name I can never remember. Yeah, Diabni. So it was like they were sort of the drama quotient of Diabni, but competent.
Well, the whole time the plan was to tell Lymond that she was dead, but he finds out she's alive when he gets to the camp. So then they just create the belief in his mind that they had originally intended to tell him, which is that she was dead.
Yeah.
Why do you think Gabriel wants the baby?
I have no freaking clue.
No idea yet. I still don't know his motivations. Once we finally get an answer to that, I think a lot of these things will fall into place. A lot of these answers to questions that we have will be there.
I just feel like we don't know yet. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's a bad guy and that he's doing all this deliberately, and that he am I colored by the fact that I want, like, as I said at the end of the last book, I think, like, I want Lymond to have a really competent adversary, you know? And so is this the competent adversary that I was wishing for at the end of the last book? And if so, are his plans so elaborate and far-reaching that he does have plans for this kid, this unborn child that's disappeared into the depths of Turkish wherever, you know? I don't know. So
I will also just note, I really like the way that Dunnett writes Una and her denial and her suffering. Like, she just breaks my heart. And there's her thinking Lymond was free as she herself wished, and had nothing now to tie him to these shores, to womanhood, to human failings and pleasures. Lymond was dedicated, and she was a sacrifice. So she's convinced herself that this is a good thing and that it was worth it. And the way she thinks, as she herself wished, and like we know she doesn't really wish it. And then we have this moment, but when she stepped past her door, she lay down suddenly sick. And she remembers a scented garden in France and a quiet room and Francis Crawford's soft laughter in her ear and his hands cool on her skin. And then we have her, she lay hard pressed, shuddering, denying her grief. So this just feeling of her like telling herself this was the right thing, this was for the best, I have saved him, and yet grieving and so, you know, sad and lost that this really was the love of her life, and he's gone and she's given him up, and she did this on purpose to save him.
You know, I didn't like Una, but you can't help but like be heartbroken over this at all.
This kills me.
I'm so sad.
It's so sad.
I hope there's happy things in her future when we pick back up with her.
Yeah, what do you think is going to happen to her?
I'm worried that if Gabriel does have some sort of far-reaching plan with this baby, that somebody's going to take her baby away from her, which, that would be really sad. Mm-hmm. Because it seems like, if I remember the reference they made earlier about how like the foreign children, like the foreign boys, get sort of adopted into the Sultan's culture and become somewhat powerful while they're alive, and that's part of their system, it would seem like Una could have, like, if she has a son and her son grows up in this system, then she would have a pretty good life as the mother of someone who's growing up to be influential and powerful. But if Gabriel is doing something or in league with Dragut in some way or has some sort of negotiated whatever about this baby, maybe that will not happen. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Just jumping backward to something slightly happier. I do love this moment right after Thompson and Lymond save the last few people, where Gabriel is like, "Pray for us all. God has been good tonight." And then Lymond just says, "Thompson has been rather splendid too."
Yeah.
And it's just, Lymond is so, stop praising, someone doesn't, I mean, not personally.
It's like, people are doing stuff here.
Yeah, recognize the work of individual people, not just going like, "Oh yes, it was holy." Blah, blah.
Like this whole bit about like giving God credit for everything is both a way to escape blame and a way to escape praise. Like if it's everything, if God did everything, then the efforts of men and women are like, it's not our fault God did it, or we don't have to give credit because God did it, and
well, and there's this whole thing where Gabriel always credits God and he's always the one praising God. So it's always like him associating himself with holiness and with success.
Yeah, he's like super knight. And you're just like, really?
God did it, by which I mean me, because I am basically God.
Right. Okay, so that was chapter 9. That was a run.
A lot.
And then we have chapter 10. That's pretty small.
Basically a coda of this section.
Yeah. So the knights go back to Malta to find out that all of these rumors are being spread, and they are belied, as one says. And then Gabriel and Jerott join Lymond and Thompson to sail to Scotland. So, any thoughts on this section?
Just this hilarious moment where Lymond knows that they're going to come join him to go to Scotland. And we see this exchange with Thompson where he's made a bet and Thompson tosses him his purse.
Yes. And they made a bet that it was going to be Gabriel and Jerott. Yep. Yeah.
So again, you were saying earlier, Lymond knows what's going on with Gabriel better than we do. He knows enough to know that Gabriel is going to come with.
Yeah.
And bring Jerott.
Yeah.
He knows that he has interests in Scotland.
Yeah. And I did think this scene about so de Aramon, the ambassador, wants Gabriel to go to Europe and tell the truth and be like, this is what's happening with the knights. And he says, betray the rot within the order, said Gabriel, which is, I mean, obviously we know that Gabriel knows what's going on, but it's just this very explicit, like, this whole order is corrupt and from the top down. And then Diarman replies, expose it, Hospitalier, so that it may be cut out. In other words, like, make a surgical strike, get rid of the rot, keep the good, save your order. It's kind of the implication. And Gabriel just is like, it's my life. And the implication is he doesn't want to do that. So, and Jerott, of course, is like, man, if you must not go back. It was my life too, but if you will leave it, I shall go with you. You're just like, oh Lord. So yeah, and he says he looked distraught. I cannot speak against the order, Gabriel repeated. He looked distraught. I cannot subject the order to question in France, and where else can I go? And my question that I wrote out to the side was, is he really distraught? Like, is he faking this? So,
well, and if he's faking it, then what is his goal? What is he actually doing here?
Well, the question, where else can I go?
And who keeps answering? Who keeps telling him what to do?
Yeah. Well, Jerott, right? He says there's another ship in the harbor.
So you can say everything Gabriel does here is Jerott's suggestion.
Mm-hmm. But is it? I mean,
he could use that as an excuse if things go awry.
Yeah. Like, who's the stronger character here? So yeah, is he doing what Jerott says, or is he saying the thing that he knows that Jerott's gonna? He's like, where can I go? And Jerott's like, there's a ship. We should go to Scotland. And Gabriel's like, oh, Scotland. You know? Yeah. So
Just another thing about this little section. I'm not trying to diminish the absolute awfulness of Diomedes at all, but it is interesting that he comes up with all of these excuses as to what really happened in Tripoli. And really the only one that's there telling him what really happened is Gabriel. So is Gabriel actually telling him what actually happened, or is he trying to influence Diomedes to say these awful things to further some sort of plot?
Is Gabriel the only one there?
I mean,
was he completely by himself? I didn't pay attention.
Not completely by himself. There are other knights. Well, no, because Gabriel and Lymond go earlier. Everybody else stays back for that feast, most of the nights. And it's basically Gabriel and Lymond will not let him know.
Yeah, Lymond doesn't
want Diomedes to know he's around. So it's basically Gabriel's word, and I don't know. I'm not, again, trying to diminish the evil of Diomedes, but if Gabriel is super evil, he could be whispering sweet little nothings in his ear.
Yeah, that is really, yeah, that's interesting. I also like this. So at the bottom of 260, where they're talking about like they've sworn to obey the Grand Master. It takes a bit of nerve to break that oath and not to fly to the other extreme. So we kind of get the implication maybe they're going to fly to the other extreme, whatever that is.
Like revolt.
Yeah, to fly home to Mother instead. If you like, Lymond says, Blythe is cleaving to Gabriel, and Gabriel is cleaving to Ellipsis. And Thompson says, you, laughing crudely, having a joyfully crude mind. And I sort of love the fact that she uses the word cleave. Like, to me, the verb cleave, the only time I ever hear that word in my life is in a wedding ceremony. It's like a man will cleave to his wife. And like, that's where that verb shows up. And so it's kind of like, is the implication here that we've got couples where Jerott is cleaving to Gabriel and Gabriel is going to cleave to Lymond?
Well, there is a very sexual subtext in this whole book.
Yeah. It's like you're gonna leave your family and cleave to your spouse. So
I mean, you could read this whole thing. You could, at this point in the book, certainly read this entire thing as Gabriel has a sexual obsession with Lymond, and he wants to get Una out of the way because he wants Lymond to himself.
Could be.
I mean, maybe.
I mean, he's constantly trying to seduce him. Can I call you Francis?
Yeah.
Of all men, my God could love you, and I too.
Yeah, we'll see. I want it to be a little bit more explicit because I also see him just like trying to manipulate him into doing what he wants. Like he's got some plan. He's got some dark plan. It's like, it could involve physically seducing Lymond, but it could also involve like, I've got ends and you are the means to my ends and whatever that is. So I don't know. I do love that Thompson says, what's taking the likes of you back to Scotland? Lymond says, reports, said Lymond. He waved vigorously at the silent boat now resting below. Delicious, intriguing reports. Yeah.
And the reports are about Jolita.
And a girl named Jolita. So my what I wrote at the end of this was, oh Lord, here we go.
Oh God. It's gonna get interesting.
Gabriel,
I mean, it already is interesting, but
yeah, Gabriel didn't seduce him yet, but Jolita could certainly pull it off.
I mean, she does have the seemingly mysterious dark side, so
yeah, I mean, if we're assuming that Gabriel is evil, it could run in the family.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying about like, why did he send his sister? Like, are they? And then the question becomes like, how under his control is she? Like, are they partners in scheming? Is she a pawn in his schemes? Is she a willing subordinate in his schemes? If he's like if this is what's happening, how much agency does Jolita have? She seemed like she was pretty with it in the very beginning of the book when we saw it. So I'd be surprised if she's a pawn.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I think now that she's being brought back into the story, we're going to learn a lot about both of them through her interactions with people. Because we've really only seen it right in the beginning. And even that was a little not so great.
Yeah, it was a little suspicious. Do we know what happened to their parents? Do we ever find that out?
We don't know yet.
So Gabriel he's what, in his mid 30s, I think they said, and she's 16. So he's 20 years older than her, which means depending on when their parents died, like he probably raised her. So that's interesting. Yeah. Who knows?
So what are your hopes and predictions for the rest of the book?
I think we're going to get a lot of intrigue in Scotland, a lot of fun things happening. With Jolita, we're going to find out what she's been up to, what everybody's been up to while this whole little section in Malta took place. So as to what it could be, I don't know.
Yeah. I want Lymond to go back to Scotland and run into the welcoming arms of his mother and everything to be fine, and for them to have a lovely family reunion. And then he finds a fantastic person to be his partner in life. And then everything turns out great. I don't think that's going to happen.
No. I want a definitive answer as to whether Gabriel is pure evil or just slightly evil.
Yeah, me too. I would really, by the end of this book, I would actually like to know, are we looking at a short-term adversary, a long-term adversary?
Or like the big bad.
Yeah, a conflicted guy who's got his own issues. Like, what are we looking at here? Also, we need to go back and figure out what was going on with the Kerrs and the Scots. Like, that was a thread that just got completely dropped when we left Scotland. So
yeah, that'll probably pick back up again.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we finished by. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I expect to enjoy the Scottish section. The Malta stuff was great, but got a little long in the tooth for me after a while. So
it's funny, people always seem to have like mixed feelings. Some people really prefer the Scottish part of this book, and some people really prefer the Malta and Tripoli part. Personally, I prefer the Malta and Tripoli part just because I love the action. I love the way she writes it. I love how she ratchets up the tension, and I love how Lymond is such a snarky bastard throughout the whole thing. It's just so fun. But yeah, many people are like, okay, I'm sick of this. I want to go back to Scotland.
Yeah. I liked the Malta stuff. I just guess there wasn't so many of the characters we probably aren't going to encounter again. So I wanted to get more, like I wanted to be with the characters that we know and the people that we know. So I'm glad to go back to Scotland to join up again with characters that we know. And we're taking the new characters with us that, we're taking Jerott and Gabriel with us to Scotland. So
I could literally just read Gabriel, Jerott, and Lymond like snarking at each other all day and never get bored. So I think that's why I love this section also.
Yeah. I think the only characters we're leaving in Malta that I'm really sad we're leaving behind are Una and the map maker guy.
Oh, Nicholas.
I really liked him. Nicholas, yeah.
To Villiganian too.
Yeah. He was good.
Really gonna miss Villiania, honestly.
I'm not really gonna miss him, but I liked him.
He wasn't as memorable. I thought the Nicholas, the cartographer, was.
Yeah. I'll be sad if we don't get any more of him.
Yeah. And then Una, of course. But she's gone.
Hopefully.
I don't think she's gone. I think there's maybe a possibility that she dies off screen, like Gideon did, which was super sad. Like maybe she'll die off screen and her child will be part of the story, but I don't think she's gone. Like I think that story there's way too many loose threads there. So.
If we spend the rest of this book in Scotland, I don't think we'll see her again in this book, but
yeah, I agree.
Who knows where Lymond's gonna go after he's finished with his little respite in Scotland.
Yeah. I'm still pushing for Constantinople. Maybe he'll have to go and like rescue his kid.
If he finds out that Una's still alive, it would be reasonable to assume that that's where Dragut took her.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's what I'm thinking.
Paul.
So it's like, seems like that seems logical to me.
I don't know if I can deal with another rescue attempt for Una that fails, though.
Oh, yeah, that's the truth.
If he goes back to rescue her, I want him to succeed this time. So.
Yeah. Really. And I want someone to be like, you're amazing.
Yeah.
To Una or to Lymond?
To Una. I mean, to Lymond too, sure, but lots of people tell Lymond.
That's true.
No, to Una. I want somebody to just be like, you're amazing, and whatever.
Doesn't believe it, but he hears it a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, then. Any final comments? Then
Looking forward to Scotland.
yeah. We'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.